Well, Syteria and TD, I'm really happy that both of you are able to be here today for this conversation, Truth and Reconciliation Conversations. But first, I'd like us to start with a moment of silence for two civil rights icons who just passed, John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, two men who certainly in my life have been inspirations, but for the country and the world, their lives have been examples of heroic struggle for justice. So I'd like us just to begin with a moment of silence and recognition of our condolences for their families. Thank you. Well, I guess I'd really like to just start with both of you sharing a little about yourselves and what it is that inspired you to be willing to be part of this conversation, and what it is that has you perhaps a little bit anxious about it. I know, Syteria, you were saying you're a little bit nervous here, so I guess we'll start with you sharing a little bit.
Okay, my name is Syteria Torrence, and I work here as the bookkeeper. I've been in accounting for like 20 years. I know I look young, but I'm in my 40s now.
Wow.
I come from, I guess, a different generation, so I'm wanting to introduce my perspective in a way. I haven't dealt with racism in a way that we've seen in history, where it's, beatings or name calling or anything like that in my face. I have experienced discrimination just in the workplace, as far as opportunities and differences in pay, things that I guess now you would call, people have given a name of privilege. So that's been my personal experience with race. My mother and my uncles, they had an experience they grew up in the Jim Crow era, and I remember hearing stories of my grandparents. When desegregation of schools happened, they sent their kids to an all-white school for, better education. And they experienced some pretty tough things. So I've heard stories from them. It's been, I won't go into all of them, but, my mom had something happen to her, and my uncle my uncle made the papers in Jacksonville for, they said he incited a race riot in a way. He wanted to celebrate Black History Week. I thought that was interesting that back then it wasn't a month, it was just a week. And I guess because he was at, an all-white school at the time, he wanted to celebrate, and he put posters and things like that on the walls, and then the kids at the time, his, fellow students kind of ripped it down, and it turned into a big thing. But so I've heard stories of just things that's happened to my family, but I personally don't have that type of story. My story is a little bit more subdued, and it's not as in your face.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great distinction that you make, because oftentimes when we talk about racism, and particularly systemic racism, we make such generalizations about it that we never really arrive at an appreciation for how vastly different people's experiences are on a continuum of prejudice, from prejudice to outright racism. So I'm glad that you are able to see that distinction in your own journey and speak to it so eloquently. Well, TD, it's great to have you in this conversation as well. I know we have been trying to make a couple of these happen, so I'm just excited to hear the inspiration for you and being part of the conversation.
Well, thank you, Khalil, and it's nice to be with you too, Syteria. I think for me, I think I start here being in the church, and I think I've now been a member of St. John's Cathedral for over 20 years, or Jennifer and I both have, and raised our children here. And I think that generally why I'm here is because I love this place.
Yes.
And it means a lot to me, and I think we enjoy so many different things, the history, but also the good things that I believe this church and our diocese stands for, and the leadership that it provides to our community. We call ourselves a diverse community, but we could always use more black members, and I think it could be even better, and so maybe that's something that can come from this. But I do think that for me, it's starting with this church, and some people might say, well, why have this conversation here? Why do it in church? And my response is just simply that, wow, if you can't have this conversation here, it's got to be awfully hard other places, and it is. We're seeing that today. So, my response is this is a perfect place for this setting, for this conversation. And, the interesting thing is, we all know we come here every week to be renewed and to take our renewed spirit back out into our workplace and our life. And, I've had a theme that we've tried to do in our work is with trying to bring Christ into the workplace. And, I'll be honest, sometimes it's Tuesday or Wednesday and I've lost total focus. Things get going and you lose it. And so then you come back and try to do it again. But I think that's really why that's where I start here anyway at the cathedral, and why I feel comfortable here talking with you all. But I also think that a couple of things have happened to me recently that are a little more specific. That, as a 54-year-old white male who's been in a privileged, had a privileged life, going to private schools, having predominantly white teachers, a couple black coaches that I really, one in particular who's a dear friend of mine, but never had a black teacher. And I've always had a few black students in my classes, and I just felt like, I can't sit back and watch this happen. And I'm really kind of embarrassed that we're still where we are today. It's just not, I never dreamed that we would still be having these difficult conversations among blacks and whites and different races. And so I think that's specifically, but there were two events that happened, and one's kind of silly, but I was watching Jimmy Fallon one night, and after the George Floyd death, he had a very serious show, and he just said, I'm not going to sit back anymore, and I'm going to use my ability to speak out and speak on what's right. And the second thing that happened was just something that was said by a couple of sports figures that I admire greatly, both of them, one Drew Brees and one LeBron James. And Drew made a remark that was probably untimely. I don't think it was intended to be a racial statement, but unfortunately I think it was received as one. And then LeBron responds with, wow, Drew doesn't get it, and he may never get it. And I think I rode around the car thinking about those two and the conversation that needs to occur in between. Because I know for a fact, I'm sure, that those two respect each other greatly. Absolutely. And yet, there's a difference in how they see their life, they see their world. And I just thought to myself, wow, that's where this is. And it's not that sitting down and having this conversation is going to change us dramatically, but it's what comes from it, So I think, those are the two reasons, more general and specific, why I'm here. And, it's just time, Khalil. It's just time. And you know it in your heart.
Well, first of all, that's a very powerful personal testimony. You said that the Jimmy Fallon show is kind of a frivolous thing and you were just sitting there. I always say that the power of popular culture is that it can reach people so much more powerfully and incidentally without being pedantic, without lecturing or anything. It just kind of seeps in.
Yeah.
And so many people have been touched by those who do decide to use their platform to speak to this moment with compassion and with curiosity. Tommy, TD, with you specifically, I just, when I came to Jacksonville and Syteria, you were asking me, am I from here? And I told you I've only been here for a couple years. But when I came here, your mother was one of the first people who kind of introduced me to Jacksonville. And my book was just coming out at the time. My new book was coming out at the time. And your mother took me to St. Mark's bookstore. She put my book there. She took me to several other places. She took me all over Ortega. We were going in places and walking into places. I didn't even know where I was. I had no appreciation for where what community I was in or anything.
Long lunches, too.
Oh, and then, then we go to the Cummer, of course, and then we go to the Cummer. Right. And I remember we were talking how, and she was sharing how her and the Chitty sisters, all of them grew up together and rode their bikes in the same neighborhood and everything. And she said, just kind of incidentally, she said, Khalil, I don't remember a time when I ever felt like I didn't belong. And she just said it in passing and went on and made several other points. And that struck me so deeply as actually the thing that is the gulf between us. When we begin to look at this issue of racism, is an absence of our sense of belonging. And I remember that hitting me like an epiphany when your mother said it. We were sitting there at the Cummer, and I just thought how in the midst of all of these things that we talk about, racial separation, racism, and all of that, we all have access to an opportunity to share in a very different story if we open ourselves up just a little bit. And so that's why with you, Syteria, when you said that your story isn't the kind of blatant racism and things that have happened to you that have you angry and up in arms and protesting. how do you feel about the protest, given your experience?
The first word that comes to mind when you ask that is nervous. I don't know why, but I do. I feel nervous about, right now it's kind of dangerous in a way to me. I wouldn't want to be protesting and something happens and any kind of dangerous incident would happen where I would have to defend myself, or the police may come and try to shut it down, and I just feel very nervous to think about protesting. I've asked myself these questions because I get very uncomfortable when discussing race sometimes. I guess because I have to deal with it every day in a way, that sometimes I like to just block it out. And that's maybe surprising for me, for someone else to hear that, being that I'm a black person. It's very overwhelming because it goes so deep at so many different layers, and I kind of feel a little hopeless or helpless in a way. Like, I don't know what I could do as a black person, because there's been generations of protesting, that, you know, and it just doesn't feel like anything drastic has changed in a way. I was very hurt. I was very emotional when I watched that video of George Floyd. Even though I have seen things happen in my lifetime, it's not the first time that I know of a person that's died at the hands of the police or has been wrongfully accused by the police. That happens so often that it just doesn't even, it feels very common to me. I know many people in my circle or friends of friends that have committed a crime that could be their first time. I know someone personally in his young 20s or 19, somewhere up in there, was a part of he didn't steal a car, but he was in a car that was stolen. And I think of where someone else that might be white, they would get a joyriding, it would be different, you know. He had never been to prison, never been to really have anything major happen, but he got 10 years. You know, the amount of time that a black person gets versus someone else, that's just so common. I know of so many people that, I mean, basically their whole lives they're gone. They do one thing and they're locked up for 10, 15, 20 years. And it's very common to me. So sometimes I think because I've seen so much that has happened, it just kind of feels normal in a way. But I was very touched. It was very hard to watch the video of George Floyd, because I don't think we've ever seen it happen in our face. We kind of heard stories or, you know of someone that things similar has happened. But yeah, I don't know what I can do as a black person besides protesting, but to me, I feel like that doesn't, I know this might be bad, but I kind of feel like it doesn't do anything. I haven't seen any major change. I mean, it's been just so much. From my generation, I think the first eye-opener for me was, this might sound silly, but it was the Oj Simpson Trial. I remember watching that as a young girl, and hearing the conversations just in passing of different people discussing that whole trial, the anger and the things that came up from that trial was an eye-opener, you know, and then you have things like the Rodney King. It's just so many things that has happened in my generation that I don't know what protesting will do, in a sense. So I'm kind of, that wouldn't be my first thing to want to do is protest. But
Well, that is a powerful analysis. You actually provided us with a very deep insight about your generation's perspective in the context of the range of experiences from the Oj Simpson trial to the Rodney King beating and uprisings in LA to today. So the sense that you almost suggested a sense of hopelessness. And Tommy, you actually hit on the same thing. You said you're saddened by where we are.
Yeah.
Share a little bit more about that.
Well, I know when she talks about those events, they're all awful, and yet they keep happening. And that's where, maybe, I hate to say it, but, the way the Floyd incident happened and the way it hit me in my life where I was, maybe during this pandemic when we're all separated, and I think Kate kind of spoke to this. It's kind of interesting how that's fallen in this time when we're all isolated, and maybe that's why my eyes picked it up on it, like they did, and to say, this shouldn't be happening. Look, I'm a lawyer, and there are bad lawyers out there. There are doctors, there are bad doctors out there. There are obviously bad policemen out there. I think most are good.
Yes.
But we can't have that, and we know that, yet I'm not sure why we keep making these same mistakes. But I do think it hurts me to hear her say that she feels hopeless. That's just not where anybody should be. There ought to be a way for her to feel, like she's got a voice somewhere, and there's a way to counter this. I guess again, it's why I'm sitting here. I'm ready to have these conversations that, again, try to lead to something productive. Whether it's, we can't correct things throughout the country, but we can certainly maybe make a difference here in Jacksonville.
Yes.
And I think it starts with human decency, for one, and treating each other better than we're doing it now. But maybe there's something that comes from these conversations that we're having, Khalil, that gathers a group like we've done in the past that can actually do something, something tangible. Because again, talking about it may be nice for us today. We've become better friends, and we know where each other are coming from a little bit better. But we've got to have something, that helps you with your platform, that with these, education, and I'm privy to some things with AMI Kids where people have had some tough breaks and maybe been misjudged along the way, but there are organizations out there. We just need to help people find them, and I think that's where, I think we can start anyway, and you should feel empowered to know that you can, help a nonprofit with their bookkeeping, because they all need it, I can tell you. But that's the only way. And I guess I would add to that, you know, we've talked about my kids and what they're seeing and what they're, you know, watching, and they don't understand it either.
Yes.
And they don't know what to do. But, gosh, if we can't make this better somehow for that next generation, I hate to think that they're sitting here having this same conversation, you know, years from now. That would be awful. Mm-hmm. So,
you know, it's one of the things that's really important for us to highlight in this conversation is that part of the challenge of racism is that we ignore the opportunity to be in relationship with each other. Mm-hmm. Or that, another way of saying it is that we're not in deep, meaningful relationship with each other. Mm-hmm. We settle for very superficial mm-hmm. relationships, right. even in our congregations. Mm-hmm. We are oftentimes content to be sitting beside someone in a pew who we don't even speak to. Right. That's mm-hmm. not uncommon.
Yeah.
And what I see in terms of why I'm so hopeful is that when you become intentional in looking for good, mm-hmm. in seeking out opportunity to be in a deep, meaningful relationship and to be in community, mm-hmm. when the more intentional you are about it, the more it starts to appear in your life. And while you're just praying for it, while you're just hoping for it, the energy embedded in that prayer and in that hope, I'm absolutely convinced, is at work, preparing the ground. Mm-hmm. An example of that, a personal example of that for me in this church, I came here and was just very warmly welcomed, mm-hmm. And preached here. And in the course of my interactions with a number of people, someone sitting in the pews was so inspired by my message that she contacted her daughter and told her daughter about me. Mm-hmm. And her daughter does this global conference in San Diego. She had never heard me herself, but upon hearing about me from her mother, felt inspired, mm-hmm. and gave me an invitation to come. And that occasion led to a whole host of other wonderful opportunities that are too big for me to speak about in this moment. But the person who did that was someone who, if I would have just looked out over the pews, mm-hmm. the differences between us are so vast. Mm-hmm. The generation that she's born to, it was the generation of Jim Crow. You spoke about it. Mm-hmm. It was the generation of segregation. It was the generation where you didn't question why it was that way. It was just that way. Mm-hmm. So I'm highlighting that because it is an indication of change. Mm-hmm. It is a clear sign of progress. Mm-hmm. There is a generation from the Jim Crow era that's still here, and they have nothing but love. Mm-hmm. They have nothing but a commitment to seeing this change manifest. Mm-hmm. They may not know how to do it on a grand scale, mm-hmm. but that's all of us. Mm-hmm. Right. That's the state for all of us.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'd just like to say that the story I'm talking about here is Ann Hicks. Here is a person who has no earthly reason to be uncomfortable reaching out to a stranger in the pulpit or to a stranger in the congregation who happens to be also black. And if one were to make assumptions because of the appearance of privilege, you, in making a negative assumption, would be completely wrong. That gives me reason for hope. That's what inspires me. And long before I knew there was an individual present, like my grandmother taught me, walk in the room with the Spirit of Christ. Walk in the room with the Spirit of Christ. And let God do the rest. Don't try to take it all on. We're not here, we're not designed to take it all on by ourselves. There was one who did that. We're not him. We follow in his likeness. So that means we got enough to do with individuals, each of us ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Each of us. You know,
Well, I was just going to say, we all judge. I mean, we all prejudge. And whether it doesn't even, it's not racial. It's just
Yes.
we do that. It's awful. But, you know, and there's so many times that I, you know, have thought that somebody was a certain way, you know, without even really getting to know them. And boy, sometimes you're really blown away. And that's what you're speaking of, obviously. But it's just, it's while we're sinners. And we come in here and try to figure it out.
We missed the mark. Right. It's like Kate said last week. She said, Khalil, sin just means you missed the mark.
That's it, yeah. Yeah.
I said, Kate, I've really missed the mark. But, Syteria, I want to return to another point that you made about how sometimes you're just exhausted. And you want to just kind of not think about it, feel it, hear about it, or anything. Can you go a little bit deeper in explaining that so people will have a sense of what you mean by that?
For me, I think I just need a break. Just to make it simple, it's not that I don't think about it, because it's in your face. I mean, I got so many different stories, personally, and family, and just from seeing things through social media or, you know, just in history, things that's happened. So I deal with it daily. Anyways, it's just sometimes when you're having these conversations, and especially when you're having them with someone of a different race, it's a little exhausting because it's like you feel obligated to try to explain or help them understand, and it's so deep. I just don't even know how to make people understand where I'm coming from, or where different people, because everybody has their own experience. I keep thinking about this. I'll tell you what happened with my mom. My grandparents decided to pull their kids out of school and send them to, when they did desegregation of schools. So they sent them out to a better school, which was, you know, predominantly white. And my mom was probably, like, I think she said in the 5th grade or 4th grade, somewhere up in there. And she said that she had never seen a white person in person. And I just thought that was so hard for me to fathom, like, what do you mean? And she said, I had never seen a white person in person in front of me. And I said, well, how is that? She said, well, everything was segregated, so you would see them like in passing in the store, but she said she had never been that close. And so what happened with her is she had a fellow classmate in front of her with blonde hair. And she said that her hair was so pretty. It was like the sun was gleaming in it, and she wanted to touch it because she said she had never seen, a person with blonde hair in front of her. Like, she just only seen it from afar. And when she reached and she asked her, could she touch her hair? And the girl said yes, and she wanted to, rub on it, and the teacher saw her and got very upset and told her, this was in those times, so she told her to get her black, hands out of her hair, and how would you feel if someone messed up your hair? And I mean, this was in the classroom, and I just couldn't believe this happened to my mom, but she said she had a yardstick. I think that's what they call them. Yeah. And she kept trying, and so my mom had her hair probably gelled back or, with grease or whatever you call it, and she kept trying to lift her hair up with the yardstick. But of course, it's
matted down.
Yeah, like, how I got my hair. Yeah. And she kept trying to lift it. Well, what she was doing was just poking her in the head. And so when my mom went home that day, she's now got lumps and stuff on her forehead. So my grandfather asked what happened, and she told him what happened. And long story short, when he went up to the school to find out how could this happen, and the principal was questioning the teacher, she was trying to lie at first, but my mom kept saying, no, that's not what happened. And and that teacher quit right there on the spot and said that she didn't go to school to teach, and I quit. And so I have so many personal stories, like it didn't happen to me, but that was just my mother. That was just one generation above. And so it's not that I want to avoid it. I can't avoid it. I have to deal with it. And but it's just, I guess it's almost like I just need a break in a way. I don't feel like I need to explain or make someone understand. I will have the conversation if it gets into, a one-on-one conversation, it slowly goes into it. But yeah, it's a little exhausting in a way. And so I just try to block it out. It's almost like giving me a vacation in a sense of not having to think about it at the moment. Not that I don't think about it and deal with it, because I do. But it's just almost like just a mental break in a way that I don't know why, I just don't want to deal with it.
Well, one of the things that that's highlighted by what you've said is that there is this sense for a lot of African Americans when we have this conversation that white folks always want us to educate them. That there's this sense that no work is done to understand on the front end. And so for me to recount to you what you've done to me when you have done it and are doing it is a bit absurd. And that's where I think one of the greatest challenges in our communication is, because there are a lot, for example, there are a lot of African American ministries, some of which I've talked with the leadership of, who refuse to participate in any kind of conversation like this with predominantly white churches. And while I can understand that kind of unwillingness to talk with a particular church, what I know is absolutely essential is for us to get over that. Because conversation is something that we do our whole lives. We're in conversation and relationship with Christ our whole lives. We're in fact, I would actually, my experience has been is the more mature and certainly the more I appreciate other people's different experiences, the deeper my conversations are. I'm not content to just ask the superficial question. I want to know something more. I'm curious. I'm curious enough to ask questions without assuming I know the answer to it. So for me, the thing that keeps leaping out at me every time you speak about an experience is you keep saying how normal it is. How normal the tragic, the horrific, the unacceptable is in your life.
Something just came to me when you said that. I think for my generation, and I'm 40, maybe because we grew up learning about slavery when it was, beatings and that part of racism. And so we're not, you're not getting beat, you're not, you can vote now. We had so many different things that we had to go through. So it's almost like, well, it's not like how it was. We know there's still a lot of injustice, but I think half of my generation is very, I don't want to say comfortable, but it doesn't seem like they have the fire to go out and try to protest or take some sort of action. Now I notice my generation that's under me has a little more fight in them. I think it's just it's just kind of overwhelming in a sense of, I don't know what areas that I want to tackle. For me, the most I've experienced is just differences. I noticed the differences in schools, differences in jobs. That's been the biggest thing for me, very hurtful in a way where, I've worked places and I know that I'm better than the next, but they'll give them an opportunity, a person that's, a white person or, and they could have the same credentials or sometimes less, and they get an opportunity or a chance. It's like, we're going to let them try this out. They don't have the degree or they don't have the experience, but I think they can do it. And I think what's hurtful for me is that I've never gotten that opportunity. Of course, you could count on Syteria because she's dependable and she's always there and things are done correctly. I just don't, that's the part that I think bothers me the most, that it's affected me the most, is just lost opportunities, differences in the workplace, differences with school. I remember I I lived on the south side most of my life. So I went to schools like Landon Middle School, and I went to Terry Parker, and I went to Wolfson, which I would have loved to graduate from Wolfson. That was the school that I was going to. But during that time, Jacksonville had a lot of students that I guess was going to different schools that wasn't in their area. So I had to switch my senior year to a predominantly black school, William Raines, and I hated it. I hated it. I just noticed that they didn't learn anything. I was a senior, so of course I didn't know anyone, but I only needed like 1 credit to graduate because I used to go to summer school and go to summer school to get extra credit. Yes. And so I just noticed that what they were teaching them in 12th grade, I had learned at Wolfson like 9th, 10th grade.
Yes.
And I remember commenting about I was always complaining about the school my whole year that I was there. It was like they didn't have books. They had 1 set of books and you had to keep them for the class. And it just didn't seem like the teachers was engaged with trying to teach. You know, it was almost just come to class, do your classwork. It's like the bare minimum. And so I noticed things like that. And so, but I never experienced what I would say would be a violent or hardcore racism, in a sense. So maybe that's why I'm so complacent in a way. Because the things that affect me is not life or death, in a sense.
Well,
Systemic.
it's systemic.
Yeah.
It's the part that we're talking about. On some levels, systemic means that it's so normalized that we no longer object to it or protest against it in the kinds of ways that we would do if it were more blatantly displayed as a single act. But the other part to what you said regarding protest, I think it's very important for us to recognize that there are many ways for us to challenge injustice. Protest is just one of many ways, and it's no more radical or revolutionary than talking to your state legislator. Because if the aim of protest is to get changes in policies, then legislators can do that as well. And so having an effective relationship that moves the needle on that front is equally important.
Yeah, I just thought of something when you said that. It made me think of most of my generation of like my inner circle friends. They don't believe in voting. It's not that big of a deal. I think just the people that I know in Jacksonville, a lot of them didn't vote until we had
Barack Obama.
President Barack
I know.
to run. And so when you say that about reaching out to your
legislator,
that seems so foreign to me, because if you're not a part of politics, if you don't even vote for your local legislation, then how do you feel that you could do anything?
Well, that point that you're raising now, that is why I show these, that's why I highlight these two extreme, whether you're in the streets protesting and you think that's your pathway, there's another person who's sitting at home that says, I'm not going to go out and do that, but I am going to write my legislator, I am going to write my congressperson, I am going to write my representative, I'm going to tell them what I think about this issue, and I'm going to push for change in that way. And oftentimes, we think that these two people are so different that we miss the opportunity to see how both can be part of the solution in working together. But you also just highlighted a really very important aspect of this broader conversation around social justice as well, and that is voting. And this is hard for some of us to really talk about, particularly in the African American community, because as you admit, your generation is not engaged in voting in a significant way, as is portrayed in civil rights struggle movies and all of those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And what I'm convinced of is part of that is because of culture, our broader kind of popular culture. Mm-hmm. So when we look at a disengaged person in terms of voting, they're not voting, they're not participating in social events that push them into meaningful relationships with people of different races. Mm-hmm. And they're all pretty much convinced that nothing's changed.
Right.
Well, that's a prescription for things to continue the way that they are. Mm-hmm. Right. That's precisely the prescription for things to continue the way that they are. Right. That's why, for me, these conversations are so important. I want to challenge that. Mm-hmm. I want to challenge that inactivity. I want to challenge in fact, there's a saying, despair is the enemy of hope. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of us who are despairing because we are not in relationship. We're not in healthy relationship with each other. That sense of belonging that your mother mm-hmm. spoke to, yeah. Tommy, right. That sense of belonging, mm-hmm. That's the opportunity that the church has. You're working here and not a member here. And here's what I would say. Every day that you would come into work as a member of this church, and I consider this my church family, so I'd like to be the first one to extend an invitation to you to become a member of St. John's Cathedral, a wonderful church doing wonderful work that's leaning into the conversation about diversity. Because you'd make a tremendous parishioner. And I guess the two of us being African American, we just add a little bit more diversity here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I was very happily surprised when I started working here. I've been here a year now. Everybody has been so friendly, so genuine. It feels very genuine.
Yes.
You can feel it.
Yes.
And I remember like my first couple of weeks working here thinking to myself, wow, is this real? I mean, are they really, are they serious?
I know.
Because I've not, I don't think I've ever experienced it in a workplace. And the good thing is because this is a church, yes. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, is what makes it better and easier. Because I've never experienced that in the workplace before. So, you know, I feel good coming here. I love it here. I love working here. Everybody is very, everyone that I've come across has been very nice and very genuine. So I could tell there's something different about St. John's Cathedral, which I'm very happy to be a part of, you know. Yeah. But, yeah, I agree with you on that.
I also think, too, when you talk about belonging, and we were talking about it in a little different context with my mom, and it's something that I feel, too. But I do think maybe it's that sense of belonging that allows you to take the next step of being truly invested and feeling some sense of ownership. Mm-hmm. You know, not so much, I mean, when I call Jacksonville my home,
yes.
It's not that I own it, but I do feel a big part of me is here, has been. The same's true when I speak of the cathedral. You know, this is a home to me. I mean, yes. So I think it's a sense of belonging, but it's also a sense of, okay, I also have a responsibility too.
Yes.
And it's kind of what you were talking about, being involved and being, you know, stepping up and saying, look, you know, I care about this place. I want to see that it does well. And I think that's, again, another reason I'm here in this conversation, because our city is not looking well right now.
Yes.
And I think, I'm not active in the political scene. I don't really want to be, but I do think it's, we start in smaller areas of the community, and this being downtown, I think can help. But we've got to figure out a way to make it better, And I think, I can appreciate the things that are hard emotionally. I've had them in my life just with, it can be in your own family, and talking about them, which you need to do, can be exhausting. And you don't have the emotional energy to, every day, because you're working and you got other stressors on your life, to pick those up and say, I need to deal with this particular issue today. I don't want to talk about, a race issue today. And I hear you, but I think it is so important for me to hear a story like that about your mom, because I wouldn't know it otherwise, and I think it's, it's horrible that existed. We can't rewrite it, but somehow, if we can, that that there are people here that care for you, and, in your workplace, maybe we can move on from there a little bit better. And I don't know. I think that's what I hope and feel like we're doing here, we're trying to do here. But yeah, it's the belonging, the participating, and the other thing too is there's so many causes to get involved in. You have to, and I have a kind of a problem sometimes saying no to things, but I do know that there are certain things I can't tackle, and there are better people for it, out there than me. But when it's important enough, you have to get involved and try to put some kind of thought or energy into it.
Well, listen, as we bring this conversation to a close, what would you like someone who's maybe listening to this or watching this stream and listening to you, what would you like to say to them? What would you like them to know? And just about this issue of racism, and just as you, and you're not speaking for anyone else, just for you, how you see it. What could you share with someone that would be the best insight that you have?
I don't know. The first thing that's coming to my mind right now.
Yes,
it
just that.
It may not fit, but.
But no, whatever comes to your mind.
I was thinking maybe each white person finds another black person and just make it a vow to just learn about them, get a personal relationship, maybe become a mentor or in a way of almost like maybe it's easier to help with a cause if it's a personal individual that you know, as opposed to just it's so many causes, like you said, that we could get into. Maybe once you get your personal relationship with the individual, see what you can do to help that person, and maybe it will snowball into more. Because I'm in a space where I kind of want to know what I can do, how I could help, because I don't feel that I didn't have that in my family where my mother or my father told me to, I want you to get involved, or they pushed us
Yes.
to be more socially aware, or it was almost in a way of just, it's kind of sad to say it out loud, but it's just, keep your head down, do a good job, don't ruffle any feathers, don't make a fuss.
Because it's dangerous out there. White people will kill you.
Yes, I mean, other black families may have approached it differently and was at the other end of the spectrum, where it was, we're gonna make a change and you're gonna get involved. My family was born and raised in the South. My grandmother was from Alabama. I think she was, her parents they may not have been slaves, but they were like sharecroppers.
Yes.
So coming from, and that's the part that I think is really hard for another person, like a white person, to really grasp that it's so many generations of when you come from a family that they're from the South, they never moved up north, they never migrated anywhere else, they just stayed here. It's so ingrained in the family that you don't even question, why aren't you doing more? Why are we just this way? I never really thought about it until maybe even just at this moment, talking about it, that, well, let me rephrase. My grandparents did decide to take their kids and put them into, because it was a choice. They didn't bus the white kids to the black, the black kids went to the better schools. And that was a choice. And so they did.
That was activism.
Yeah, so they did do that. And I remember my mom saying that all of the neighbors in the neighborhood, they were probably like 2 or 3 families that decided to do that. And everyone else thought, you guys have no business. This was the mentality.
Yes.
I couldn't believe why are you sending those kids there? They have no business being in school with those white kids. It was kind of frowned upon from my grandparents.
By other black people, by other blacks in the community, that this is disrespectful. You were not welcomed in doing it.
Yeah. So when you come from a family where they did do something, but I don't remember hearing or seeing anything else that happened after that. Possibly could be due to what happened to my mom and then what happened to my uncle. I mean, from my understanding, he made the newspapers. They had to get the NAACP involved with lawyers, and it was this big thing. They wanted to send him to prison. I mean, I think he was a senior in high school, and because of those posters and the other kids getting upset, and it turned into this big thing. So it could have been from that. Those are 2 big things that happened because they decided to send their children, and my grandparents had 5 kids, but those were like the 2 biggest things that happened. And so I never had any reason to fight in a way. Not a reason, but it just wasn't at the forefront. It wasn't pushed upon us. So
you kept your head down and just worked.
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. Right. And you don't ruffle any feathers. You don't do anything to get anybody upset. And that is where I come from, in a way. I've had many conversations with people from up north, black co-workers that I've met, and they come from up north, and they have a whole different mentality than us, and I think it has something to do with what it does when you're from the South, and you have generation upon generation that's only remained in the South, and so your mindset is totally different. It's almost in a way of you may even feel that you don't belong. I have that feeling a lot.
Yes, that's why I highlight this point of belonging.
Yeah, so I think once you start having personal relationships and it's just it's not so broad, and you have an individual that you could go to, and you, like you say, you have those deep conversations, it's easier for one, because you know that person. Right. And then you could really delve in deep and see what you can do to help. But yeah, that's really the only thought that came to mind, is just kind of grab someone, get to know them, become friends with them on a personal level.
I think that's excellent advice. In fact, that advice goes to the very heart of our faith. One must have a personal relationship with Christ.
Yep.
The quality of one's personal relationship with Christ will determine the quality of one's faith and the quality of one's faith community. So this point that you speak to about find one person. You don't have to try to go out and get the whole world. Find one person and be courageous enough to enter into a relationship with that one person. And so, TD, for you, what would be the parting wisdom here?
Well, I think it's a great point that you brought up, and I feel closer to you already.
I do too.
I think that's a step in the right direction. I think it's just to add on to what you're saying. I think we could do more as a cathedral by inviting guest preachers. I know we've had choirs here in the past that have almost broken stained glass windows in here. And I think we could continue to engage in that. So those are maybe some tangible things that come out of this, these conversations. But I would hope that we keep having them a little bit further, and we draw from some other folks that either in our church or not, maybe in the community, and keep this conversation out there. And then when we get back together, when we can congregate, see how we've done, and really try to put it to a test a little bit. And I'm eager to stay involved with it. I just think it's important for us, and it's it's like we've been saying. I mean, we're here as Christian brothers and sisters, and so let's carry on. But I do think you're right. The personal relationship is the key. We do come and go a lot. And I think if we can figure out ways to, rearrange the seating, rearrange, who we speak to and what we ask about, it'll make us better. So I'm hopeful for that.
I'm very hopeful. As I think about what both of you have said, from the point of how normalized the separations and distances are, to Tommy, the inspiration that you have spoken to about just deciding that it's time to look at this and see what you personally can do different. Both of you have said in a way that we need to challenge the status quo. And I'm not talking about the broader society alone. I'm talking about our own personal status quo, comfort zone. And so I'd just like to close with a scripture that speaks to that for me. It's from Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove the good, perfect, and acceptable will of God. So this whole ideal that we are called as Christians to not settle for things as we see it, that we are not called to simply conform to the status quo. We're called to question it, but we question it with a spirit and a heart of love. Our curiosity is born of an aspiration to be more like Christ. So I pray that we won't be conformed. We won't surrender. That spiritually, emotionally, and even in voice, we will commit ourselves to living up to what we declared as our faith, and that is followers of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for today's conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Appreciate it.